Chicago glittered beneath a cold October sunset, its skyline painted in amber and steel as commuters poured across the bridges spanning the Chicago River. From the 23rd floor of Brooks and Hart Design Studio, Nathan Brooks stood by the window, absently rubbing the gold wedding band on his finger while waiting for his wife to answer her phone. Straight to voicemail. Again. He lowered the phone without a sigh. After 10 years of marriage, disappointment had learned to arrive quietly. Nathan? He turned. His business partner, Miles Hart, leaned against the conference room doorway with 2 paper cups of coffee. Still here? Miles asked. It's after 7. Nathan accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. I promised Emily we'd have dinner. Miles chuckled. And let me guess. Nathan forced a laugh. You know her company. Miles shrugged. Those marketing firms never sleep. Nathan nodded, though something about the explanation felt increasingly thin. Emily Carter Brooks hadn't always worked like this. When they first met in graduate school, she'd insisted that success meant nothing if you had nobody to celebrate it with. She had dragged him away from blueprints and deadlines just to watch sunsets over Lake Michigan. She'd laughed with her whole body. She had kissed him in grocery store aisles because life, according to Emily, was too short to wait until they got home. Somewhere along the years, she had stopped laughing. The apartment overlooked Millennium Park, decorated with tasteful furniture Emily had spent months selecting from Scandinavian boutiques. It looked like the kind of home featured in architecture magazines, beautiful, immaculate. Empty. Nathan placed takeout containers on the kitchen island. Pasta. Emily's favorite. He checked the clock. 6:42 p.m. A message finally appeared. Emily. Running late. Big client dinner. Don't wait up. Nathan stared at the tiny heart emoji. It should have comforted him. Instead, it felt strangely rehearsed. He typed back. No problem. Be safe. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. No reply. Nathan ate alone. The television played quietly in the background, though he couldn't remember a single thing the news anchor said. At nearly 11, the front door finally opened. Emily stepped inside wearing a cream-colored coat and heels, looking exhausted. Hey, she said softly. Nathan smiled. Long day? You have no idea. She leaned over and kissed his cheek. It lasted barely a second. He noticed a faint scent of expensive men's cologne beneath her perfume. Not enough to mean anything. Enough to notice. You ate? She asked. I waited for a while. I'm sorry. I know. She walked directly toward the bathroom. I'm going to shower. Nathan watched her disappear down the hallway. The apartment felt unusually quiet. A vibration broke the silence. Emily had left her phone on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up. Richard Sullivan. Incoming message. Nathan instinctively looked away. Then another notification appeared. Excellent tonight. Couldn't stop thinking about your smile. His stomach tightened. A second message arrived before the screen went dark. Sleep well. See you tomorrow. Nathan didn't unlock the phone. He didn't need to. For the first time in years, a question entered his mind that refused to leave. Who exactly was Richard Sullivan to his wife? Outside, the lights of Chicago shimmered against the river, as beautiful as ever. Inside the apartment, something invisible had begun to crack. Nathan Brooks had always believed that trust wasn't built through grand declarations. It lived in ordinary moments, the spare key hidden beneath the flower pot, the shared grocery list on the refrigerator, the password neither of them had ever bothered to hide. That was why the 2 messages from Richard Sullivan haunted him far more than if he had caught Emily in a hotel room. They didn't prove an affair. They proved intimacy. And intimacy had a way of growing in places where love had stopped being tended. The following morning arrived with pale sunlight spilling through the apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows. Emily stood in front of the bathroom mirror, fastening a pair of pearl earrings while listening to a podcast about female leadership. She looked composed, confident, every inch the successful communications director people admired on LinkedIn and at networking events. Nathan watched her from the doorway. You have another client meeting tonight, he asked casually. She paused for only half a heartbeat. Probably. The same client. She smiled without looking at him. Richard's obsessed with this campaign. There it was. Richard. Not Mr. Sullivan. Not the CEO. Just Richard. Nathan noticed because he had never noticed before. She grabbed her laptop bag. "I'll probably be late." He nodded. "I figured." Emily kissed him on the forehead. "I love you." The words landed between them like fragile glass. "I love you too," Nathan answered automatically. She left. The apartment became painfully silent. Nathan arrived at Brooks and Hart Design Studio 20 minutes later than usual. His partner, Miles Hart, immediately noticed. "You look terrible. Didn't sleep. Project stress." Nathan hesitated. "Marriage." Miles leaned back in his chair. "Want to talk?" Nathan almost did. Instead, he shook his head. "It's probably nothing." Miles gave him a look that suggested he didn't believe him. "Sometimes," Miles said quietly, "the things we call probably nothing turn out to be exactly the opposite." Nathan laughed weakly. "I'll survive." He hoped he wasn't lying. Throughout the day, he found himself opening Emily's social media profiles more often than he cared to admit. Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. Nothing unusual. Pictures from charity galas, coffee meetings, corporate conferences. Smiling with coworkers. Smiling beside Richard Sullivan. Nathan stared at one particular photograph from a company fundraising event held 3 weeks earlier. Richard stood at the center of the executive team. Emily stood beside him. Everyone else faced the camera. Richard wasn't looking at the photographer. He was looking at Emily. It wasn't obvious. Most people would never notice. Nathan couldn't stop noticing. That evening, Emily texted. "Dinner with clients again." Nathan replied almost instantly. "Hope everything goes well." A minute later came another message. "Thank you for understanding." Understanding. He hated that word. Because he had spent 10 years being exactly that. Understanding when work came first. Understanding when vacations were postponed. Understanding when anniversaries became expensive dinners squeezed between meetings. Understanding had slowly become another word for being left behind. Instead of going home, Nathan drove aimlessly through downtown Chicago. Traffic crawled beneath glowing office towers. Restaurants buzzed with couples beginning their evenings. He stopped at a red light outside Sullivan Media Group's headquarters. Employees streamed from the building. Laughing. Talking. Checking their phones. Then he saw Emily. She emerged through the revolving doors. Not alone. Richard Sullivan walked beside her. Even from half a block away, Nathan recognized him immediately from company photographs. Tall. Silver-haired. Perfectly tailored navy suit. The effortless confidence of a man accustomed to being the most important person in every room. They weren't holding hands. They weren't kissing. They simply walked together. Richard leaned closer to say something. Emily laughed. Not politely. Not professionally. She threw her head back with the same uninhibited laugh Nathan hadn't heard at home in years. A valet brought Richard's black Mercedes around. Instead of saying goodbye, Emily climbed into the passenger seat. Nathan remained frozen behind the steering wheel. The traffic light turned green. Cars behind him honked. He didn't move. Eventually, the Mercedes disappeared into the evening traffic. Nathan drove home alone. Sleep abandoned him again. At 2:17 a.m., he found himself sitting in the living room with an untouched glass of whiskey. Emily finally came home just after 1. She had slipped quietly into bed, believing he was asleep. Now she rested peacefully upstairs. Nathan couldn't. His mind replayed the image endlessly. Her laugh. Richard opening the passenger door. The ease between them. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe several executives had shared the same dinner. Maybe her car had broken down. Maybe. The human mind was remarkably creative when protecting itself from unbearable truths. Saturday arrived with unexpected rain. Emily announced she needed to stop by the office for a few hours. Nathan offered a smile. No problem. She left carrying only her laptop. 2 hours later, Nathan noticed she'd forgotten her tablet on the dining table. It buzzed repeatedly. A calendar notification appeared across the locked screen. Lunch reservation Lake House Restaurant. Guests. Emily Carter. Richard Sullivan. Onikinos PM. Nathan frowned. Not a team lunch. Not a department meeting. Just 2 names. His pulse quickened. He picked up the tablet. He never attempted to unlock it. He simply stared at the notification until it disappeared. His reflection stared back from the black screen. A man who suddenly didn't recognize his own life. By early afternoon, curiosity overcame restraint. Nathan drove toward the lakefront. He told himself he wasn't spying. He only wanted peace of mind. If Emily was truly meeting Richard for business, he'd feel ashamed of doubting her. The Lake House restaurant overlooked Lake Michigan, its large windows reflecting the gray sky. Nathan parked across the street. 20 minutes passed. Then Richard's Mercedes arrived. Emily stepped out of the passenger seat. Again. Richard placed his hand lightly against the small of her back as they entered the restaurant. It lasted only a second. Professional enough to explain away, personal enough to linger. Nathan gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to storm inside. Demand answers. End the uncertainty. Instead, he reached into the glove compartment. Inside lay the compact camera he normally used for photographing architectural details. Without fully thinking, he lifted the lens. One photograph. Then another. Then another. Nothing scandalous. Nothing intimate. Just enough to establish a pattern. The realization sickened him. He wasn't looking for the truth anymore. He was collecting evidence. That evening, Emily returned home carrying a bakery box. I brought your favorite cheesecake. Nathan looked at her. She smiled warmly, almost guiltily. What? Nothing. You've been quiet lately. Have I? She sat beside him on the couch. I know work's been crazy for both of us. Nathan searched her face. The woman beside him looked exactly like the one he'd married. The same freckles. The same green eyes. The same gentle smile. Only now he wondered how much of that smile belonged to him. Emily rested her head on his shoulder. I miss us. Nathan closed his eyes. So do we. His words were true. Painfully true. Because he didn't miss the woman sitting beside him. He missed the woman he believed she had been. Long after Emily had fallen asleep, Nathan opened his laptop. He created a folder. Its name was only one word. Richard. He uploaded the photographs. Saved the dates. Recorded every detail he could remember. For the first time since reading those messages, his emotions gave way to something colder. More deliberate. He would not accuse Emily without certainty. He would not become the paranoid husband imagining ghosts where none existed. If there was an affair, he would uncover it. If there wasn't, he would delete the folder and spend the rest of his life regretting his suspicion. Nathan closed the laptop at 3 in the morning. Outside, Chicago slept beneath a blanket of rain. Inside the apartment, the distance between husband and wife had quietly become wider than the city itself. Rain lingered over Chicago for most of the following week, turning glass towers into blurred reflections and washing the streets in shades of gray. Nathan Brooks barely noticed. His days became measured not by meetings or deadlines, but by observations. Emily leaving 15 minutes earlier than necessary. The sudden habit of silencing her phone whenever she entered the apartment. Business trips that appeared on her calendar only after she had already packed. Tiny inconsistencies. Each one harmless on its own. Together, they formed a picture Nathan no longer wanted to deny. He never argued. Never questioned. He kissed her goodbye every morning with the same quiet affection she expected. He asked about her day. He smiled at the right moments. He became an actor inside his own marriage. Only the audience had no idea the performance had begun. Friday afternoon brought an opportunity Nathan hadn't anticipated. Emily called while he was reviewing blueprints. I forgot my laptop charger. You want me to bring it? If you don't mind. What floor? 28. I'll be there in 20. Her voice sounded distracted. Not guilty. Not nervous. Just busy. That somehow hurt even more. Sullivan Media Group occupied one of the newest skyscrapers overlooking the Chicago River. The lobby gleamed with polished marble and oversized digital displays celebrating the company's latest advertising campaigns. Nathan checked in at reception. The young receptionist smiled professionally. Emily Carter? She's expecting me. After a brief phone call, the receptionist frowned. That's strange. What is? Miss Carter isn't at her desk. Nathan forced a small laugh. Probably in a meeting. Most likely. She handed him a visitor badge. You can leave the charger with her assistant on 28. Nathan thanked her and stepped into the elevator. The ride felt unusually long. 28 floors. 28 opportunities to turn around. He didn't. Emily's assistant looked confused. I haven't seen her since lunch. Nathan blinked. She isn't in a meeting. The assistant hesitated. I thought she left with Mr. Sullivan. When? Around 1. Nathan glanced at his watch. It was nearly 4. 3 hours. He smiled politely. No worries. As he turned to leave, a voice drifted from nearby. They're probably still upstairs. Nathan stopped. Upstairs? Another employee looked up from his computer. The executive conference suite. Nathan thanked him before either of them could say anything more. The executive floor required special access. Normally. Today, someone exited just as Nathan approached. The security door clicked open. He slipped inside without thinking. The hallway was almost silent. Large windows overlooked the city. Most offices stood empty. He heard voices. A woman's laughter. Emily. Nathan followed the sound. The conference room was dark. Empty. The voices came from farther down the corridor. Richard's private office. The door wasn't completely closed, only slightly open. Nathan reached it without making a sound. Then he heard Richard. I told you he'd never figure it out. Emily laughed softly. You don't know Nathan. I know men like him. Silence. Then Richard again. He's comfortable. Predictable. Safe. Nathan's breathing stopped. Emily answered so quietly he almost missed it. He doesn't deserve this. Richard chuckled. Neither do you. A pause. You deserve someone who understands ambition. Nathan couldn't see them clearly from the narrow opening. Then Richard stepped into view. He reached for Emily's face. She didn't move away. Instead, she kissed him. Not uncertainly. Not reluctantly. Like two people who had done it many times before. Nathan felt the world become strangely quiet. No anger. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Only silence. The kind that arrives when hope dies. He turned around before they could see him. Walked calmly back down the hallway. Entered the elevator. Pressed the lobby button. Only after the doors closed did his knees nearly give out. He sat inside his car for almost an hour. Traffic flowed around him. People hurried home. Life continued. His didn't. His phone buzzed. Emily. He stared until the call stopped. A text arrived seconds later. Did you make it here? Nathan smiled bitterly. He typed. Something came up. I left the charger with reception. Another lie. To protect a woman who had stopped protecting him long ago. Emily came home shortly after 8. Nathan had prepared dinner. Candles burned softly on the table. Her eyes widened. I thought we could eat together, he said. She smiled. I've missed this. So have I. Throughout dinner, she talked about work. A difficult client. Marketing deadlines. Richard's leadership. Nathan listened carefully. Every sentence contained another lie. She never realized he already knew. After dessert, Nathan stood. I have something to ask. Emily looked up. What is it? He walked into his office. Returned carrying his camera. Then his laptop. Without speaking, he placed them on the dining table. Emily frowned. Nathan. He opened the folder. Photographs appeared one at Richard opening the car door. Lunch by the lake. Late night departures. Private meetings. Emily's expression slowly drained of color. You followed me. Nathan's voice remained calm. I trusted you. Silence. I never wanted to become the kind of husband who follows his wife. Emily looked away. I can explain. No. He shook his head. You can tell me the truth. Her breathing became uneven. Tears gathered in her eyes. She struggled to continue. It just happened. Nathan laughed. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just once. A broken sound neither of them recognized. It just happened. We worked together every day. We became close. I didn't plan it. It wasn't supposed to. She covered her face. I don't even know when everything changed. Nathan stared at the woman he had loved for a decade. You kissed him. Emily couldn't answer. You told me you loved me this morning. More silence. You came home every night. Silence again. You slept beside me. Finally, she whispered. I'm sorry. The words sounded unbearably small. Nathan picked up his phone. Call him. Emily looked up in horror. What? Richard. Nathan. Call him. Slowly, trembling, she obeyed. Richard answered after 2 rings. Emily? She couldn't speak. Nathan took the phone. Good evening, Richard. A pause. Nathan. I assume you know who I am. Another pause. I think this conversation is best handled privately. Nathan almost smiled. It already is. Richard sighed. I'm sorry you found out this way. No emotion. No shame. Only inconvenience. As adults, Richard continued, these situations are unfortunate. Situations. Nathan closed his eyes. My marriage is a situation. I understand you're upset. You don't understand anything. Richard's tone remained composed. Emily and I developed feelings. It happens. No one intended to hurt you. Nathan realized then exactly what kind of man Richard Sullivan was. People weren't people. They were variables. Assets. Risks. Problems to be managed. Nathan ended the call without another word. Emily was crying openly now. I never stopped loving you. Nathan looked at her for a long time. Then quietly asked. If that's what your love looks like. He swallowed. I don't ever want to see your hatred. Emily broke completely. She reached for him. He stepped back. Just one step. It felt like crossing an ocean. An hour later, Nathan carried a single suitcase toward the front door. Emily stood in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. Please don't leave. I need time. We can fix this. He looked around the apartment they had chosen together. The framed wedding photographs. The vacations. The Christmas ornaments collected over 10 years. Every object suddenly belonged to strangers. I don't know who you are anymore. Nathan. I loved the woman I married. His voice cracked for the first time. I don't know the woman standing in front of me. Emily covered her mouth, sobbing. I made the biggest mistake of my life. He nodded. I believe you. She looked up with desperate hope. Then he quietly added. But I'm the one who's going to live with it. The elevator doors closed between them. Nathan watched Emily grow smaller through the narrowing gap. She didn't scream. She didn't chase him. She simply stood there, broken by the consequences of choices that could no longer be undone. Outside, the cold Chicago wind struck his face. He placed his suitcase in the trunk of his car. There was no destination in mind. No hotel reservation. No plan. Only one promise. He would grieve. He would bleed. He would question everything he thought he knew about love. But neither Emily Carter, nor Richard Sullivan, would ever have the satisfaction of watching him fall apart. Nathan started the engine. Without looking back, he drove into the Chicago night, leaving behind the home that had once held every dream he had ever dared to build. The first week after leaving his marriage felt less like freedom and more like surviving the aftermath of an earthquake. Nathan Brooks checked into a furnished apartment overlooking the North Branch of the Chicago River. It wasn't much compared to the penthouse he had shared with Emily. White walls, a modest kitchen, furniture chosen by someone who expected tenants to stay only a few months. It suited him. There were no photographs to remove. No memories hidden inside drawers. No echoes of laughter that no longer belonged there. For the first time in years, silence felt honest. Every morning, Nathan followed the same routine. Wake at 6. Run 5 miles along the Riverwalk. Coffee from the same corner cafe. 8 hours at Brooks and Hart Design Studio. Gym after work. Read until exhaustion forced him to sleep. His schedule became a scaffold, holding together a life that threatened to collapse whenever he allowed himself to think. The nightmares still came. Emily laughing in Richard Sullivan's office. Their wedding vows dissolving into whispered lies. The sound of Richard saying, "It happens." Nathan always woke before dawn. Always alone. Miles Hart watched his best friend transform with growing concern. You've become a machine. Nathan looked up from a stack of construction drawings. I'm working. No. Miles folded his arms. You're hiding. Nathan smiled faintly. There's a difference. Miles didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed 2 coffees on the drafting table. I've known you for 15 years. Nathan remained silent. You haven't mentioned Emily once. Another silence. You also haven't asked how she's doing. Nathan finally looked at him. Because I already know. Miles frowned. You do. People like Emily don't fall apart immediately. His voice was calm. They stay busy. They convince themselves they made the difficult but necessary choice. They keep moving. Nathan stared through the office window. The collapse comes later. Miles studied him for a long moment. I don't know whether you're healing. He hesitated. Or planning something. Nathan picked up his coffee. I'm still deciding. Emily called almost every day. Nathan never answered. Her voicemail messages became increasingly desperate. Nathan. Please. Can we just talk? You don't have to forgive me. I just need you to hear me. Then came emails. Letters. Even handwritten notes left with the concierge at his apartment building. He read every one. He replied to none. It wasn't punishment. He simply had nothing left to say. Words had carried them into marriage. Lies had carried them out. 2 weeks later, divorce papers arrived. Nathan signed them without changing a single line. His attorney looked surprised. You aren't contesting anything? No. The apartment? She can keep it. The investments? I only want what's legally mine. The artwork? The vacation house in Wisconsin? Nathan shook his head. I don't want to spend the next 2 years arguing over furniture. The attorney leaned forward. Most clients want revenge. Nathan looked out the office window. So Jijai. What changed? Nathan thought about Richard. About Emily. About himself. I realized revenge fueled by anger burns too quickly. The attorney waited. Nathan quietly continued. If I'm going to destroy something. He paused. I'd rather destroy the right thing. Fate intervened 3 days later. Brooks and Hart was invited to bid on the design of a new mixed-use development on Chicago's South Side. The developer's representative arrived carrying a familiar logo on his briefcase. Sullivan Capital Partners. Nathan felt his pulse slow. Not quicken. Slow. As though his emotions had suddenly become ice. The representative introduced himself. Victor Lang. He shook Nathan's hand without recognizing the name. We're financing several large commercial projects. Nathan forced a polite smile. We'd be happy to submit a proposal. Victor handed over a thick folder of preliminary documents. Everything you need is inside. Nathan accepted it. Thank you. The meeting lasted less than an hour. Nathan barely heard a word. Late that evening, alone in the office, he reviewed the documents. Most contained standard architectural specifications. Budget estimates. Engineering reports. Construction schedules. Then he noticed something odd. A cost projection referenced a subsidiary company that no longer existed. Nathan frowned. He searched further. Another invoice. Another dissolved corporation. Then another. Millions of dollars had apparently been paid to companies that had ceased operations years earlier. At first he assumed it was a clerical error. Until he found identical payment patterns repeated across multiple developments. His experience managing construction budgets made one thing immediately obvious. Numbers rarely lied. People did. Nathan took copies home. Not because he intended to use them. Because he couldn't ignore them. For the next several nights, he buried himself in financial records instead of architectural plans. He created spreadsheets. Compared public filings. Matched contractor registrations. One inconsistency became 5. 5 became 23. By the end of the week, an unmistakable pattern emerged. Money flowed from Sullivan Media Group through shell companies into private investment accounts. Small amounts. Spread across dozens of transactions. Invisible to anyone not looking carefully. Nathan leaned back in his chair. This isn't accounting. He whispered the words into the empty apartment. It's laundering. He almost closed the files. Almost. This had nothing to do with Emily. Nothing to do with their marriage. It belonged to federal investigators. Corporate lawyers. People far more qualified than him. He shut the laptop. Walked into the kitchen. Poured himself a glass of water. Then his phone buzzed. Emily. Another voicemail. Against his better judgment, he pressed play. Her voice sounded exhausted. I left Richard. Nathan froze. He never loved me. Silence. I think. Maybe he never loved anyone. Another pause. I know I don't deserve your sympathy. I just wanted you to know you were right about him. The message ended. Nathan stood motionless. He felt no satisfaction. No triumph. Only confirmation. Richard Sullivan had treated Emily exactly as he treated everyone else. As assets. As disposable pieces on a board only he believed he understood. Nathan returned to the laptop. This was no longer about an affair. The following morning, he scheduled lunch with an old college friend. Rachel Moreno now worked as a forensic accountant for a respected consulting firm. She had built a reputation for uncovering financial fraud in corporate acquisitions. Nathan slid several anonymized documents across the table. "I need a professional opinion." Rachel adjusted her glasses. "You changing careers?" He smiled faintly. "Not exactly." For 20 minutes she read without speaking. Finally, she looked up. "Where did you get these?" "I can't say." Rachel lowered her voice. "If these records are authentic." She tapped one of the spreadsheets. "Someone is committing serious financial fraud." Nathan remained expressionless. "How serious?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "Federal prison serious." That evening, Nathan sat alone on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan. The wind carried the smell of rain across the dark water. Weeks earlier, he had imagined revenge as something loud, explosive. Watching Emily beg. Watching Richard lose control. Now it looked different. Quiet. Patient. Precise. Like architecture. A weak foundation could support a skyscraper for years. Until one day, a single overlooked crack became enough to bring everything crashing down. Nathan understood buildings. He understood pressure. He understood collapse. And for the first time since his marriage had ended, he wasn't thinking like a wounded husband. He was thinking like an architect. Richard Sullivan had spent decades constructing an empire of influence, wealth, and carefully manufactured respectability. Nathan wasn't interested in setting it on fire. Fire was dramatic. Fire drew sympathy. No. He intended to do something far more devastating. He would expose the cracks already hidden beneath its foundation. Then he would step back. And let gravity do the rest. As the Chicago skyline shimmered against the black waters of Lake Michigan, Nathan closed the folder marked Richard Sullivan. Beside it, he placed a new folder. Its title contained only one word. Evidence. For the first time since discovering Emily's betrayal, revenge no longer felt like an emotional impulse. It had become a strategy. And strategies, unlike anger, could afford to wait. Winter arrived early in Chicago. By the first week of December, Lake Michigan had turned the color of cold steel, and a sharp wind swept through downtown streets, driving pedestrians deeper into their coats. Christmas lights appeared in shop windows, and families crowded the Christ-Kindle market, laughing over cups of hot chocolate and mulled wine. To most people, the city looked festive. To Nathan Brooks, it looked like a place where everyone had learned to smile while carrying invisible wounds. 3 months had passed since he walked out of his marriage. The divorce papers were nearly finalized. Emily still occupied the penthouse. Nathan had never gone back. Some memories deserved to remain exactly where they had died. His investigation had become methodical. Every evening after work, Nathan reviewed another set of corporate filings connected to Sullivan Capital Partners. The pattern Rachel Moreno had identified continued to expand. The shell companies weren't isolated mistakes. They formed an intricate web. Construction firms. Marketing agencies. Real estate holding companies. Consulting businesses with no employees. Money flowed between them in circles until its origin became nearly impossible to trace. Nathan wasn't an investigator. He wasn't trying to become one. But architecture had taught him something valuable. Every structure, no matter how complex, depended on a few critical load-bearing columns. Remove the right one. Everything else collapsed under its own weight. The question was no longer whether Richard Sullivan had committed financial fraud. The question was where the first crack should be exposed. One Tuesday afternoon, Rachel called. "You need to see something." They met in her office overlooking the loop. She closed the blinds before speaking. "I ran additional searches using public court records." Nathan leaned forward. "And?" Rachel placed a folder on the desk. "Richard Sullivan has settled 6 lawsuits in the past 9 years. Nathan frowned. "I couldn't find any. Because almost every case ended with confidential agreements." She opened the folder. Wrongful termination. Another document. Sexual harassment. Another. Retaliation against whistleblowers. Another. Fraudulent vendor contracts. Nathan slowly turned each page. Different names. Different years. The same company. The same executive signature. Richard Sullivan. Rachel folded her hands. Whatever happened between him and Emily? She paused. It wasn't the beginning. Nathan stared at the files. It was a pattern. Rachel nodded. Exactly. That evening, Nathan received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject: We need to talk about Richard Sullivan. No greeting. No signature. Only a single sentence. You aren't the first person he's destroyed. Attached was a phone number. Nathan hesitated for almost an hour before calling. A woman's voice answered. Mr. Brooks? Yes. My name is Sarah Whitmore. Her voice sounded careful. Measured. I worked for Richard for 8 years. Nathan remained silent. I know about Emily. He felt his chest tighten. How? I still know people inside the company. Another pause. You aren't his first husband. Nathan frowned. What does that mean? Sarah gave a humorless laugh. I mean you're not the first man whose marriage Richard helped destroy. They met the following afternoon at a quiet coffee shop near Lincoln Park. Sarah appeared to be in her early 40s. Professional. Confident. The kind of woman who had once believed competence protected people from exploitation. It hadn't. I was his executive assistant. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. For 8 years. Nathan listened. He preferred ambitious women. She looked directly into his eyes. Not because he respected them. Because ambitious people are easier to manipulate. Nathan remembered Emily saying Richard understood her ambition. Now the words felt poisonous. Sarah continued. He studies people. He learns exactly what they're missing. Recognition. Promotion. Validation. Then he convinces them only he can provide it. Nathan asked quietly. Did he have affairs often? Sarah's expression didn't change. I stopped counting. Sarah slid a small notebook across the table. I kept records. Nathan looked surprised. Why? Because no one believed us. Inside were handwritten dates. Hotel reservations. Private flights. Expense reimbursements disguised as business meetings. Names. So many names. Some had left the company. Others remained. One had attempted suicide after being publicly blamed for financial decisions Richard himself had approved. Nathan closed the notebook. This is bigger than I imagined. Sarah nodded. Much bigger. Across the city, Emily Carter sat alone in Richard Sullivan's office. Or rather, she sat in the chair where she had once believed her future was being written. Richard barely looked up from his computer. You wanted to talk. Emily folded her arms. You've been avoiding me. I've been busy. You said we'd figure things out. Richard sighed. Emily. Not M. Not come here. Not the warm voice she had grown accustomed to. Simply her name. Clinical. Distant. You knew I left my husband. I know. I lost my marriage. I know. My friends barely speak to me. Richard finally looked at her. And? Emily blinked. And? What exactly are you expecting from me? Her heart sank. I thought. She couldn't finish. Richard stood and walked toward the window overlooking downtown Chicago. I never asked you to leave, Nathan. Emily felt as though the room had tilted beneath her feet. You said we had a future. I said we had chemistry. You said you loved me. Richard shrugged almost imperceptibly. I cared about you. Cared. Emily whispered. That's your explanation. He turned. You're an intelligent woman. Don't confuse emotion with commitment. She stared at him in disbelief. What about us? There is no us. The sentence landed harder than any scream. Richard adjusted his cufflinks. Our relationship has become complicated. Emily laughed through tears. Complicated? You've destroyed my life. No. His voice remained calm. You made choices. She stepped closer. I made them because I believed you. Richard's eyes hardened. No. You made them because you wanted more than your marriage offered. Emily couldn't breathe. For the first time, she understood. Nathan had never been competing with another man. He had been competing with the version of herself Richard had promised to create. A version that had never existed. Emily walked out of Sullivan Media Group carrying a cardboard box. Her assistant watched silently as security deactivated her building access card. No farewell party. No speeches. No appreciation for 6 years of work. By evening, the company's internal directory no longer listed her name. She had become disposable. Exactly as Richard had intended. Meanwhile, Nathan's investigation continued expanding. Through Sarah, he met others. A former financial controller who had refused to falsify invoices. An architect whose company had been forced into bankruptcy after exposing contract irregularities. A journalist whose story mysteriously disappeared after legal threats. Each carried different scars. Each described the same man. Brilliant. Charismatic. Patient. Ruthless. Richard Sullivan didn't simply win. He collected people. Used them. Discarded them. Then moved on without looking back. Nathan noticed something unsettling. Every person believed they were alone until someone connected the pieces. Isolation had been Richard's greatest weapon. Several days later, Nathan received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. Emily. She looked thinner. The confidence that once filled every room had vanished. Dark circles framed her eyes. She held no flowers. No dramatic gesture. Only a small envelope. "I won't stay." Nathan opened the door but said nothing. She placed the envelope on a nearby table. "I found these." Inside were copies of expense reports. Private travel reimbursements. Signed approvals. Richard's signature appeared repeatedly. Emily spoke quietly. "I didn't understand what I was approving." Nathan studied the documents. "Why are you giving me these?" "Because." Her voice cracked. "I finally understand who he is." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "And who am I?" Tears filled her eyes instantly. "The man I should have trusted." Silence settled between them. Not the silence of anger. The silence of irreversible loss. Emily wiped away a tear. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve another chance. I just don't want anyone else to lose their life because I stayed silent." Nathan believed her. Not because she cried. Not because she looked broken. But because, for the first time since he had known her, she wasn't asking for anything in return. He accepted the envelope. Nothing more. Nothing less. Emily nodded once. "Goodbye, Nathan." She turned and walked toward the elevator. Nathan watched the doors close. Months earlier, seeing her leave would have shattered him. Now it simply hurt. Some wounds stopped bleeding long before they stopped aching. That night, Nathan spread every document across his dining table. Sarah's notebook. Rachel's financial analysis. The construction records. Emily's expense reports. Each piece fit another. The picture was no longer about one affair. Or one failed marriage. Or one manipulative executive. It was about a system built on fear, silence, and the certainty that no one would ever compare notes. Nathan slowly gathered the files into a single archive box. He wrote one label across the front in black marker. Richard Sullivan Complete Dossier. He looked out at the snow beginning to fall over Chicago. Months ago, revenge had meant making one man suffer. Now, it meant making sure no one else ever would. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Nathan understood that his greatest ally might not be anger. It might be the truth. By January, Chicago had become a city of ice. The sidewalks along the loop disappeared beneath packed snow. The river moved sluggishly between banks lined with frost, and every morning commuters hurried through the cold with their collars turned up against the wind. Nathan Brooks barely noticed the weather anymore. His world had narrowed to two places. His office. And the growing archive of evidence that occupied nearly half the dining table in his apartment. Every invoice had been cross-referenced. Every corporate filing indexed. Every witness statement scanned, catalogued, and backed up on encrypted drives. The architect who once spent evenings sketching buildings now spent them reconstructing lies. His apartment no longer looked like a home. It looked like the headquarters of a private investigation. "You've missed 3 dinners." Miles Hart tossed a folder onto Nathan's desk. "You skipped Christmas." Nathan didn't look up from his computer. "I was busy." "Nah." Miles seethed. "You were obsessed." Nathan continued typing. "I have work to do. This isn't work. It matters." Miles walked closer. "I know what Richard did. I know what Emily did." His voice softened. "But I'm watching it erase you." Nathan finally looked at him. "I'm fine." Miles gave a tired smile. "You know what the scary part is?" "What?" "You actually believe that." Nathan wasn't sleeping. "Not really." He rested for a few hours each night before waking around 3 in the morning, his mind immediately returning to spreadsheets, testimony, timelines, and financial transactions. Coffee replaced breakfast. Energy drinks replaced lunch. Exercise disappeared. His beard grew longer. Dark circles settled beneath his eyes. Even clients noticed. During a presentation for a major hospital project, Nathan lost his train of thought halfway through an explanation he had rehearsed dozens of times. The room fell silent. One client politely redirected the conversation. Nathan recovered. Barely. Afterward, Miles closed the conference room door. You need a break. I don't. You almost lost that contract. Nathan rubbed his forehead. I said I handled it. Miles didn't argue. Instead, he quietly asked. When was the last time you laughed? Nathan searched for an answer. Non came. Emily's life was unraveling just as quickly. Finding another executive position proved almost impossible. Officially, she had resigned. Unofficially, everyone in Chicago's corporate marketing community knew there had been complications. No one said the word affair. They didn't have to. Professional circles had their own language. References stopped returning calls. Interviews ended politely. Recruiters suddenly became unavailable. She accepted freelance consulting work from home simply to pay the mortgage on an apartment she was preparing to sell. The beautiful penthouse no longer felt luxurious. It echoed. Every room reminded her of Nathan. The coffee mug he always used. The bookshelf he built himself one rainy weekend. The framed photograph from their honeymoon in Oregon. She packed the picture into a cardboard box. Then unpacked it. Then packed it again. Some decisions refused to stay made. One snowy afternoon, Emily found herself standing outside Brooks and Hart Design Studio. She watched employees entering and leaving through the revolving doors. Nathan emerged nearly an hour later. He looked different. Thinner. Older. As though the previous 6 months had added 10 years to his face. She almost didn't recognize him. Nathan. He stopped. His expression revealed neither anger nor warmth. Only exhaustion. What are you doing here? She struggled to find words. I wanted to see how you were. I'm working. I can see that. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Emily spoke again. I've started therapy. Nathan nodded once. Good. I should have done it years ago. He remained quiet. My therapist says I spent most of my life chasing validation. Nathan looked toward the street. I hope it helps. Emily swallowed. I understand now why She stopped herself. No. I don't understand. I don't think I ever will. Nathan looked at her for the first time. You don't need to explain why you cheated. I'm not trying to. Then why are you here? Tears filled her eyes. Because every day I remember another way I hurt you. Nathan's jaw tightened. I remember them too. She reached into her purse and removed a small envelope. Inside was a wedding photograph. Not the official portrait. A candid one. Nathan was laughing at something she had whispered during the reception. Neither of them had been looking at the camera. I found this. Emily's voice trembled. I thought maybe. Nathan gently pushed the photograph back toward her. I can't take that. Why? Because that man doesn't exist anymore. The word struck harder than any accusation. Emily lowered her eyes. I'm so sorry. Nathan nodded. I know. It was the first time he had ever acknowledged her apology. It changed nothing. Rachel Moreno noticed the changes too. She invited Nathan to lunch under the pretense of discussing financial records. Instead, she closed the folder without opening it. You're burning out. Nathan smiled faintly. Everyone keeps saying that. Because everyone keeps seeing it. She leaned forward. I've worked fraud investigations for 15 years. Nathan listened. I've watched people devote everything to exposing terrible men. She paused. Most of them succeeded. And they still lost their marriages. Their health. Their children. Their peace. Nathan looked away. What if someone has already lost those things? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said quietly. Then don't lose what's left. That evening, Nathan returned to his apartment and stared at the evidence wall he had built inside his spare bedroom. Photographs. Flowcharts. Financial diagrams. Names connected by strings of notes. Months of work. Months of obsession. he suddenly realized something unsettling. He knew more about Richard Sullivan's business empire than he did about the new projects at his own architectural firm. His revenge had become his profession. His actual profession had become an interruption. The breaking point arrived unexpectedly. Nathan forgot his mother's birthday. His younger sister called that night. "You didn't even text." He closed his eyes. "Why? You've never forgotten before." "I've been busy." "No." Her voice cracked with disappointment. "You've disappeared." After the call ended, Nathan sat alone in the darkness. He opened his phone. Dozens of unread messages. Friends inviting him to dinner. Coworkers checking in. Family asking if he was okay. He hadn't answered any of them. Not because he didn't care. Because every conversation felt like time stolen from the mission. The realization frightened him. Richard Sullivan had already taken Nathan's marriage. Now he was quietly taking everything else. Unable to sleep, Nathan drove to Lake Michigan just before dawn. The shoreline was nearly empty. Ice floated against the rocks as waves rolled in beneath a pale winter sky. He stood there for almost an hour before someone spoke behind him. "You look like I used to." Nathan turned. It was Sarah Whitmore. She held 2 cups of coffee. "I come here sometimes." She handed him one. "After everything Richard did." She looked across the frozen water. "I spent 5 years trying to destroy him." Nathan remained silent. "You know what happened?" "What?" "I won." Nathan frowned. The investigation ended. People went to prison. Richard paid settlements. She smiled sadly. "And I still didn't know how to be happy." Nathan stared at the lake. Revenge doesn't tell you what to do after it succeeds. The sentence lingered between them. Long after the wind carried away every other sound. Later that afternoon, Nathan received a call from his attorney. "The divorce is final." Just like that. 10 years of marriage reduced to a single sentence. Nathan thanked him. Hung up. Sat in complete silence. No celebration. No tears. Only an overwhelming sense that an entire chapter of his life had quietly closed while he was too distracted to notice. He reached into a drawer and removed his wedding ring. For months he had carried it in his pocket without understanding why. Now he walked to the river behind his apartment. He turned the ring over one last time. It still caught the winter sunlight. A perfect circle. A symbol of promises once made with complete sincerity. Nathan closed his fingers around it. Then, instead of throwing it into the water, he slipped it into a small wooden box. Some memories deserve to be kept. Not because they no longer hurt. But because pretending they had never existed would be another kind of lie. That night, Nathan shut down his laptop before midnight for the first time in months. The evidence remained exactly where he had left it. Richard Sullivan was still out there. The truth hadn't changed. But Nathan finally understood something that had been quietly growing inside him. If exposing Richard required becoming someone he no longer recognized, then Richard would have claimed one final victory. The battle ahead would demand everything Nathan had. The challenge was making sure it didn't demand the man he was trying to save. Outside, fresh snow covered the city in silence. Inside, for the first time in months, Nathan allowed himself to simply sit in the quiet without invoices, without timelines, without anger. It lasted only a few minutes. But it was enough to remind him that beneath the grief, beneath the obsession, beneath the hunger for justice, the man Emily had betrayed was still there. He just had to find his way back to him. The invitation arrived on a gray morning in early March. Heavy cardstock. Embossed lettering. Gold foil across the top. Sullivan Capital Partners. Annual Investor Summit. The Palmer House Hilton Chicago. Celebrating a decade of innovation and growth. Nathan Brooks studied the invitation for nearly a minute before setting it back on his desk. Miles looked over from the doorway. "What is it?" Nathan slid the envelope across the table. Miles read it silently. "They invited you. Our firm designed one of their commercial developments 3 years ago." Miles looked up. "And you're thinking about going?" Nathan didn't answer. He simply stared out the office window at the skyline beyond. For months, he had gathered evidence. Interviewed witnesses. Cross-referenced financial records. He had waited. Prepared. Built a foundation strong enough to withstand scrutiny. Now the building was ready. All it needed was one carefully placed fracture. 2 weeks before the summit, Nathan met with Rachel Moreno and Sarah Whitmore one final time. The conference room at Rachel's consulting firm felt unusually quiet. Boxes of documents covered the table, hard drives, signed affidavits, public filings, copies of expense reports. Rachel folded her hands. Once this leaves the room. She looked at each of them. There's no taking it back. Sarah nodded. There shouldn't be. Nathan remained silent. Rachel continued. We're not exposing an affair. No. Nathan's voice was calm. We're exposing fraud. He looked around the room. If people only remember my marriage. He paused. Then none of this mattered. Sarah smiled faintly. You're finally thinking like a whistleblower. Nathan shook his head. No. I'm thinking like someone who doesn't want another family destroyed. Meanwhile, Richard Sullivan was preparing for the biggest presentation of his career. Television crews would attend. Financial journalists from New York and Chicago had confirmed their presence. Several institutional investors were expected to announce hundreds of millions of dollars in new commitments. His communications team had spent weeks rehearsing every detail, every camera angle, every speech, every applause cue. The event wasn't simply a conference. It was a celebration of power. Richard intended to leave the stage stronger than ever. Emily Carter watched the preparations unfold from the audience seating. She no longer worked for Sullivan Media Group. Her invitation had come through an investor she had once managed. She almost hadn't attended. But something deep inside her refused to let her stay away. Perhaps she still needed to see Richard one last time. Perhaps she wanted proof that the life she had sacrificed everything for truly no longer existed. Or perhaps she simply wanted to understand whether Nathan had ever found peace. She noticed him almost immediately. 3 rows ahead. Dark navy suit. Calm posture. A leather briefcase resting beside his chair. He didn't look toward her. Not once. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. More than 600 guests filled the room. Investment bankers, developers, corporate executives, city officials, employees, journalists. Television cameras stood ready along the walls. Richard Sullivan walked onto the stage to sustained applause. Confident. Relaxed. Exactly as Nathan remembered him. Good afternoon. Richard smiled warmly. It's an honor to welcome all of you. His presentation began flawlessly. Revenue growth. Expansion. New partnerships. Slides filled with soaring graphs and polished marketing videos. The audience applauded repeatedly. Nathan listened without expression. His briefcase remained closed. Not yet. 25 minutes into the presentation, Richard announced the company's newest development fund. This initiative represents transparency. Nathan almost laughed. Accountability. Rachel glanced toward him. And our commitment to ethical leadership. Nathan slowly opened his briefcase. Sarah noticed. So did Rachel. Neither spoke. The question and answer session began. Analysts lined up beside microphones placed throughout the ballroom. Most questions were predictable. Projected earnings. Construction timelines. Future acquisitions. Richard answered each with polished confidence. Then Nathan stood. The room barely noticed. One more investor. One more question. An usher handed him a wireless microphone. Richard smiled politely. Yes, sir. Nathan introduced himself. My name is Nathan Brooks. For the first time that afternoon. Richard's smile faltered. Only slightly. Nathan continued. I have a question regarding payments made through Evergreen Consulting. Richard blinked once. Our accounting department would be happy. Nathan interrupted gently. They dissolved in 2018. A murmur spread through the audience. Nathan's voice remained steady. So why did Sullivan Capital continue transferring millions of dollars into their accounts until last year? The ballroom became silent. Richard adjusted his tie. I'm afraid I don't recognize the specific transaction. Nathan reached into his briefcase. He removed a folder. Then another. Then another. Each labeled. Each organized. Months of work. I thought you might say that. Rachel stood. So did I. Sarah followed. And so did I. Heads turned across the ballroom. Journalists immediately reached for notebooks. Nathan handed copies of financial records to several reporters seated near the front. Rachel distributed forensic accounting summaries. Sarah provided sworn statements from former employees. The movement spread through the room like a wave. Richard remained on stage. Still smiling. But only with his mouth. Not his eyes. One journalist stood. Mr. Sullivan. He held up the documents. Are these authentic? Richard looked toward his legal counsel. No answer came. Another reporter raised her hand. Can you explain payments routed through inactive corporations? A third voice. Why were whistleblower complaints settled confidentially? Then another. And how many executives signed non-disclosure agreements? Questions arrived faster than answers. The carefully rehearsed presentation dissolved within minutes. Television cameras that had been focused on promotional slides now pointed directly at Richard. Live broadcasts continued uninterrupted. Millions watched. Richard attempted to recover. These allegations are misleading. Nathan remained standing. I agree. The room turned toward him. They're incomplete. He removed one final binder. The complete records were delivered to federal investigators this morning. Silence. Absolute silence. Richard stared at him. For the first time since Nathan had known him, he looked uncertain. Not frightened. Not yet. But uncertain. The smallest crack had appeared. Then came the moment no one expected. Two men entered through the ballroom doors wearing dark business suits. Behind them followed several federal investigators. Conversations stopped instantly. One investigator approached the stage. He quietly presented identification. Richard's attorney stepped forward. The investigator spoke calmly enough that only those nearest could hear. Richard's face slowly lost all color. The microphones, however, captured one sentence clearly. We have a warrant authorizing the seizure of company financial records. The ballroom erupted. Phones appeared everywhere. Employees whispered frantically. Investors stood from their seats. Several executives quietly walked toward side exits. Others remained frozen. The empire Nathan had spent months studying wasn't collapsing because he had pushed it. It was collapsing because every hidden crack had finally been exposed to daylight. Emily watched from the back of the room. She felt strangely detached. As though she were observing someone else's life. Richard looked smaller now. Not physically. Morally. The confidence that had once attracted her had vanished beneath layers of panic. She remembered every conversation in his office. Every promise. Every compliment. Every carefully chosen word. None of them had been expressions of love. They had been negotiations. She had mistaken manipulation for admiration. Ambition for intimacy. Power for affection. The realization hurt more than Nathan's departure ever had. Because this pain belonged entirely to her own choices. Richard finally looked toward Nathan across the crowded ballroom. Their eyes met. Months earlier, Nathan had imagined this moment would feel triumphant. It didn't. There was no surge of victory. No satisfaction. Only a quiet recognition that the truth had arrived exactly where it belonged. Richard spoke into the microphone one last time. This isn't over. Nathan answered from the audience. No. His voice remained almost gentle. It should have never begun. Within an hour, every major financial news network carried the story. Federal investigation targets Sullivan Capital Partners. Investors withdraw funding amid fraud allegations. CEO faces mounting scrutiny. Stock prices plummeted before markets closed. Banks suspended credit facilities. Board members announced emergency meetings. By evening, Richard Sullivan had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His carefully constructed empire wasn't destroyed in an explosion. It unraveled in real time. One investor. One document. One truth after another. Outside the hotel, snow drifted quietly through the Chicago evening. News vans crowded the entrance. Reporters shouted questions at anyone leaving the building. Nathan walked past them without stopping. Emily stood across the street. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, she said softly, "You did it." Nathan looked back toward the hotel. No. He shook his head. They did. He glanced at the investigators carrying boxes of evidence toward waiting vehicles. I only opened the door. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I wish I'd listened to you. Nathan answered with quiet honesty. I wish you had too. There was nothing else to say. She watched him disappear into the falling snow. For the second time in less than a year, she watched the man she had once loved walk away. The difference was that this time, she finally understood why he never looked back. Spring returned to Chicago quietly. The snow disappeared first from the sidewalks, then from the rooftops, and finally from the parks surrounding Lake Michigan. Trees that had stood bare through months of bitter cold slowly dressed themselves in fresh green, while cafes pushed tables back onto sidewalks and joggers reclaimed the lakefront trails. The city looked as though it had forgotten winter. People often believed healing worked the same way. Nathan Brooks had learned that it didn't. Healing wasn't forgetting. It was remembering without bleeding. 6 months had passed since the investor summit. Richard Sullivan's face now appeared less on magazine covers than in courtroom sketches. Federal prosecutors had filed multiple charges involving wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of corporate records. Former executives who had once defended him accepted plea agreements in exchange for testimony. Board members resigned. Investors filed civil lawsuits worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The empire Richard had spent 20 years building collapsed faster than anyone thought possible. Not because one man exposed him. Because the truth finally reached people who had the power to act. Nathan followed the news only occasionally. There was no satisfaction in reading another headline. Justice had become the responsibility of the courts. His responsibility was learning how to live again. Brooks and Hart Design Studio slowly found its rhythm once more. Nathan had delegated projects. Returned to mentoring younger architects. He began sketching by hand again instead of staring endlessly at financial documents. One Friday afternoon, Miles entered Nathan's office carrying 2 coffees. "I almost forgot what this place looked like." Nathan smiled. "So did I." Miles leaned against the door. "You laughed in the meeting today." "I did. Twice." Nathan chuckled. "I guess I did." Miles studied his friend for a moment. "You know." He smiled warmly. "I think you're finally coming back." Nathan looked around the office. Sunlight spilled across blueprints scattered over his desk. For months he had seen only evidence. Now he saw buildings again. Dreams. Possibilities. Things meant to be created instead of destroyed. "I think so too." Emily Carter no longer lived downtown. After selling the penthouse, she rented a small apartment in Evanston. It overlooked neither the skyline nor the lake. There were no floor-to-ceiling windows. No designer furniture. Only quiet. She found work at a non-profit organization helping women re-enter the workforce after career interruptions. The salary was modest. The recognition almost non-existent. For the first time in years, no one cared about titles or executive status. Only whether she showed up. She did. Every day. Some evenings she remained after hours helping clients rewrite resumes or prepare for interviews. One afternoon, a woman thanked her for believing in her. Emily smiled politely. Inside, she wondered how many people Nathan had quietly believed in while she had been searching for someone else's approval. Regret had become her constant companion. Not dramatic. Not loud. Simply present. Like a shadow that lengthened whenever the sun appeared. She continued therapy. Week after week. Month after month. There were no miraculous breakthroughs. Only uncomfortable truths. She learned how deeply her need for external validation had shaped her choices. How success had slowly become tied to other people's admiration. How Richard had recognized those fractures long before she had. One afternoon, her therapist asked a simple question. "If Nathan forgave you tomorrow?" Emily looked down at her hands. "Could you forgive yourself?" She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. Not yet. Late one evening, Nathan found an envelope tucked beneath his office door. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. He recognized Emily's handwriting immediately. "Dear Nathan. This is the last letter I will ever write to you. Not because I've stopped being sorry. Because I've finally understood that apologizing over and over asks you to carry my guilt for me. That isn't fair. I spent months hoping you might come back. Then I spent months hoping you might forgive me. Now I hope something different. I hope one day my name no longer hurts when you hear it. You once loved me when I didn't know how to love myself. I confused ambition with worth. I confused attention with love. I confused admiration with intimacy. Those mistakes cost us everything. I cannot change what I did. I can only become someone who would never make those choices again. I truly hope your future is beautiful. You deserve one. Emily." Nathan read the letter twice. Then folded it carefully. He did not cry. He did not smile. He simply placed it inside the same wooden box that held his wedding ring. Some chapters deserve to be remembered. Not because they were happy, because they had shaped the person who survived them. Several weeks later, Sarah Whitmore invited Nathan, Rachel Moreno, and a handful of former Sullivan employees to dinner. No reporters. No lawyers. No discussions of court cases. Just people whose lives had intersected through the actions of one powerful man. Conversation gradually shifted away from Richard. Someone announced an engagement. Another described a new job. Rachel laughed so hard she nearly spilled her wine. Nathan realized something almost startling. For 2 full hours. No one had spoken Richard's name. Life had quietly moved forward. Early one Saturday morning, Nathan returned to the lakefront where he had spent so many sleepless nights. Spring sunlight shimmered across Lake Michigan. Children rode bicycles. Dogs chased tennis balls along the grass. An elderly couple walked hand in hand without saying a word. Nathan carried the small wooden box beneath his arm. He sat on the same bench where Sarah had once warned him that revenge could become another prison. Slowly, he opened the box. Inside lay 2 things. His wedding ring. Emily's final letter. He looked at them for a long time. Then he smiled, not because the pain had disappeared, but because it no longer ruled him. He slipped the ring into his pocket. The letter remained in the box. Closing the lid gently, he whispered to himself. Thank you. Not to Emily. Not to Richard. To the version of himself that had endured heartbreak without surrendering his humanity. That afternoon, Nathan attended the grand opening of a children's community center designed by Brooks and Hart. Families filled the courtyard. Local musicians played jazz beneath colorful banners. Children ran through the building, laughing as they explored classrooms filled with sunlight. A little boy tugged on Nathan's sleeve. Did you build this? Nathan knelt to his level. I helped. The boy looked around in amazement. It's awesome. Nathan laughed. No. He glanced at the children already filling the hallways. They're the ones who make it awesome. As the boy raced away, Nathan stood quietly, watching life unfold inside walls he had helped create. For the first time in a very long while, he felt proud of what his hands had built instead of what they had exposed. Months later, Richard Sullivan stood before a federal judge. His tailored suits had been replaced by plain dark jackets. The confidence that once commanded boardrooms had faded into weary resignation. The sentence was substantial. Financial penalties. Years of imprisonment. Permanent disgrace. As reporters rushed to publish the verdict, Nathan never turned on the television. He learned about the outcome days later from a brief newspaper article left in the office break room. He read the headline. Folded the paper. Returned to work. That was all. Richard no longer occupied enough space in his life to deserve another thought. One warm evening in early summer, Nathan walked along the Chicago River after finishing work. The city glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Boats drifted slowly across the water. Music floated from nearby restaurants. His phone buzzed. A message from Miles. Dinner tonight? Everyone's coming. Nathan smiled. He typed back. Wouldn't miss it. He slipped the phone into his pocket and continued walking. Months earlier, he would have spent the evening reviewing evidence. Now he was meeting friends. The difference seemed almost impossibly small. Yet it was everything. He paused on one of the bridges overlooking the river. The skyline reflected across the water, beautiful not because it was flawless, but because every building carried the marks of time, weather, and endurance. People often imagined revenge as watching someone else lose everything. Nathan had believed that once. He knew better now. Real payback wasn't ruining the people who betrayed you. It was refusing to let their betrayal become the final chapter of your story. It was waking up one morning and realizing they were no longer the first thought in your mind. It was laughing again, creating again, trusting again, living again. Nathan looked toward the horizon as the last light settled over Chicago. He took a deep breath. Then, without looking behind him, he walked forward. Epilogue. Some betrayals end marriages. Some destroy careers. Some leave scars that never completely disappear. But scars are proof of healing, not proof of defeat. Emily would spend years rebuilding a life founded on honesty instead of ambition. Richard would spend years confronting the consequences of believing power placed him above accountability. And Nathan would spend the rest of his life building things that lifted people instead of breaking them. In the end, love had failed. Revenge had never truly won. Justice had done its work. But hope, quiet, patient, and stubborn, had endured.